I'm Louis Love.
I'm Tony Carter.
I'm Thabiti Anyabwile.
And welcome again to the Front Porch. Welcome. We're glad that you stopped by to join us. Today, we're going to talk about shepherding. You know what? Off the cuff, it's not a term that's used too much in many circles. Right? Many churches don't use the term shepherding. Yeah. So let's clarify that. What do you mean by shepherding?
I'm thinking the pastor's responsibility to oversee the flock, to guard, to feed, to protect, to guide the people of God who've been entrusted to his care. So my mind goes to 1 Peter 5, where Peter says there, shepherd the flock of God that is under your care. And so that shepherding metaphor drawn from a pastoral husbandry kind of context means we're watching over people, and we're leading people, we're guiding people, we're feeding people, we're protecting people until the Lord comes. Yeah.
See, I'm glad you went that way with the T, because again, the term is not used that much in a lot, especially traditional circles. I'm growing up in the traditional black church. I don't think I ever remember our pastor being referred to as the shepherd, or even the under shepherd. Later on, under shepherd maybe, but that's not what they called one another.
That's right.
But it does get to a lot of important parts of the pastor's responsibility that you just might not get by calling him pastor.
That's right. That's right. Or preacher.
Or preacher.
Or minister.
Yeah. I think it gets to the whole idea of what the word pastor even means.
Yeah.
I think people are actually, when they're saying pastor, that's what they're saying, whether they realize they're saying it or not, because that's what it means. It means pastor. The elder means overseer.
That's right.
What is he overseeing?
That's right.
He's overseeing the congregation, which is the flock of God. And so however you're referring to the person who is, whether it's pastor or elder or overseer, what you're really getting at.
Yeah.
The word means to shepherd.
Yeah.
I think it's drawn from the fact that Jesus is called, our chief shepherd, the great shepherd, the good shepherd,
That's right.
and all of that being, as you say, under shepherds. Under who?
That's right. Under Christ.
Under Christ. I remember when, at my licensing, it wasn't there wasn't any great theologians there, a lot of country pastors, but one of the questions that they asked, and they were so proud of asking, is like, who's the head of the church?
Amen.
Who's the head of the church?
Right, get that clear.
And they expected you to say Jesus Christ. Don't you dare say the pastor. Jesus Christ, because they understood that under shepherding, whether they didn't call it that, necessarily, but that's what it meant.
Go ahead. T.
No, just praising God for those older country shepherds who wanted to be clear and make it foundational that the pastor is not the head of the church. That Christ is the head of the church, and our shepherding function, our under shepherding function, is delegated to us from Christ, and it's ministerial, and we're to do it in accord with His Word, not as though we are. It's our church, and there are two things, man, Lou. You talk about why perhaps we don't hear this term or understand this concept in a very robust way. There are at least two factors in my mind that contribute to that. One is, on the one hand, thinking of the pastoral role in largely CEO terms.
Right. Yeah.
So oversight becomes largely administrative in people's thinking, not shepherding, not pastoral in people's thinking. On the other hand, is reducing the role largely to Sunday morning event preaching.
Right.
Sure.
Right? So that the pastor is the preacher. And the role gets sort of constricted rather than sort of filled out in terms of all the other things that go into shepherding. Yeah.
When you were talking about the your licensing, when they asked who was the head of the church, and I was like, T, man, praise God for those older men, and in the context that you were licensed. And I thought about it's not the baptismal formula, but it was part of it. And the first thing that they would say is, in obedience and the church would holler out, "Obedience!" Right to the great head of the church. Right?
Yeah.
But we know
Right.
that was more of a formula. Everybody talk about Christ being the head of the church. To them, he ain't head of the church. Which is why I love the way you opened it up with the whole with First Peter and the guiding and the nurturing and the protecting. And you think about the shepherd out. That's kind of the picture we get of the shepherd out there with those sheep. And man, how much did he get from those sheep? What did they give him?
Yeah.
A lot of bites.
Yeah.
A lot of mess to step through.
Sure.
Yeah.
What did they do for him? They listened to him, and if not, he had to take some means to get them to listen. But that thing has been reversed today. You know, and I think one of the reasons why it's been reversed is because fleecing the sheep, and it's interesting because that was not the shepherd's responsibility.
That's right.
They got fleeced, right? But that was not his responsibility.
That was his responsibility.
I think a lot of that is because we've lost the concept, the meaning of the word, or the bringing that word. Word's been out on the sideline too long. The word shepherd, shepherding God's people.
Yeah. And of course, one of the things that's really important about shepherding is that you actually know your sheep.
You know,
right? And so when and it's striking to me because I think I've met a lot of Christians who, when they're shepherded for the first time,
Right.
they feel and know the difference. You know, and they observe it. They say, we were talking about this a moment ago. I've never had a pastor who has fill in the blank, or I've never been in a pastor's home. You know, I mean, when I first got to Cayman, a young woman came to me very, very sheepishly after service and said, "I got an issue I need to talk to somebody about." I said, "Well, you know, call me up, come by, let's set an appointment." She came by a couple of days later, and the first thing she says, I didn't know that I could go to a pastor. You know, and you think, oh gosh, that should be known by everybody. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Right.
So that knowing the sheep is vital if you're going to be faithful to the sheep.
Sure it is. My friend Mike Gooseby was when he was did a church plant in Chicago. He church was going for a little while, and so he and his wife were doing some visitations, and they went by a couple's home, right? And the guy was just, man, he just wasn't getting it, right? He wasn't a member of the church.
Okay.
His wife was.
Okay.
And so he's like, "Now who are you again?" Right? Mike said, "Well, I'm Mike Gooseby. It's my wife." And he goes, "You're the pastor?"
Right.
Right? Yeah. And he goes, "Yeah, I pastor. I think it was Hope, New Hope, right?" And she goes, "Yeah." And he scratched his head. Mike said, "This went on for like 5 minutes. This guy just could." You know, the problem. What was going on with him? He could not believe that the pastor came by their house.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Come to their house.
Yeah.
He could not believe. He couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And he told Mike. He said, "Man, look, I've been around," because he wasn't a kid. He was an older man. He said, "And no pastors ever showed that kind of interest in her."
Yeah. Because I ain't coming to your church.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of guy who might come to the church.
Who might come.
You know, because one of the things that shepherding your people will do, if you do it well, is it'll help to highlight the shepherd from the hireling.
That's true.
It'll help make much clearer who really does love God's people and is caring for God's people to the point of laying down their life for God's people. And which of those guys who do it while it's convenient and for their own benefit. And when it gets hard, the hireling leave the sheep. And so, you know, we ought not underestimate the kind of evangelistic witness that's created by faithful shepherding as well.
Yeah. Well, let me run this by you. We're on the porch. We just talking, right? A lot of guys who might come in on our conversation and listen up. This is news to them. This has not been, and they have been pastors for some time. How do you help them? How do you help them to begin to develop in their own hearts and their minds the biblical concept of pastor, as opposed to what either their tradition or what they've been involved in, or even what their own thinking was.
You know, they need to probably rethink what they understand pastoring to be, because I think they probably think that pastoring is just preaching.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah.
And so they need to kind of rethink that. Let's help them rethink that pastoring, like you said on other occasions, pastoring is at least preaching,
right?
But it's more.
Right.
It's more than preaching. Right. It's never less than preaching.
That's right.
But it's more than preaching. And preaching is that primary responsibility. I mean, that's where that's the first line of pastoring. You know, that's the first line of counseling.
That's right.
It's the preaching. That's the first line. That's church discipline. Happens in the preaching event. You know, so that's the first line of preaching, of pastoring, is preaching. And so the pastor needs to understand that if he is faithfully seeking to expound the text, that is part of his pastoral responsibility.
Okay.
Not just his preaching responsibility.
Okay.
You know, and then move out from there, so that now his responsibility comes with following up on that responsibility of preaching. How do you now disciple that congregation in the word that you have now preached? Because perhaps what they're thinking is, once they've preached, they've done their job. They've done their job. Well, that's what I get paid to do. And not realizing, no, now the responsibility comes in. How do you disciple the people in what now has been preached? You know? And I think that's where the thing needs to be reevaluated.
Very similarly, I think I would start with an encouragement and say you probably are shepherding your people on some level, certainly by the ministry of the word. And you probably also have some people in there with whom you've already developed some natural relationships that you check in on from time to time. What I would then encourage is that you widen that circle, that the circle of your concern intentionally be the entire congregation, and that you have a plan for both the macro and the micro shepherding of your church. And I'm borrowing that term from Timothy Whitmer, his excellent book, The Shepherd Leader. So if you, as Tony is saying, you need to rethink the whole shepherding concept, that's one of the best recommendations I could make, is The Shepherd Leader by Timothy Whitmer. And he walks through both the history of elders and leadership, all the way through to practically you need a shepherding plan. And that plan should include knowing the sheep on a macro and a micro level. So knowing the whole congregation as a body of people, but also each member of the congregation. Knowing the sheep, feeding the sheep, macro, micro. So on the macro level, you're preaching Sunday morning. Everybody's hearing that. But how are you going to disciple now? How are you going to press that down into the micro level, whether it's small groups or counseling or one-on-one discipleship? Protecting the sheep. You know, how are you going to guard the flock? Again, macro and micro, knowing the particular vulnerabilities of your people and how you're guarding them. So he walks through those things, and that's what I want to say. Is okay, you're in the ministry, you're shepherding on some level, even if it's just the preaching of the word. Now grow the concept and grow the application to the entire church, and work through with your other leadership a plan for making sure that people don't slip through the cracks and people don't get lost. Whitmer has a wonderful line in the book. He says, well-shepherded sheep don't stray. And I read that. I remember we was reading that with our elders, and I just, you lean back and go, that's right. People who feel shepherded and loved by their leaders don't tend to go feed in other pastures, and wander like sheep without a shepherd. And so that putting that in place is critical. And think about your own ministry, personal ministry in the church, as part of your shepherding plan. So one of the things that elders are required to be is hospitable, right? Would it be lovers of strangers, right? And so open your home and invite not just the people you know already and have a relationship in the church, but those strangers in your church, those members that you don't know so well, or visitors to the church who've been coming along for a little while but haven't joined. Open your home, practice table fellowship, and sharing the things of God in those more intimate settings, and visitation. Something you was talking about visitation a moment ago. So our personal ministry has to be bigger than our pulpit ministry.
And T, you keep saying elders, and I think with an S, and I think part of that is just the understanding the need for the plurality of shepherds.
That's well said.
Because the church, the pastor should see himself as a shepherd, but biblically speaking, the idea is that there is a plurality of shepherds, overseers in the church who are taking up that responsibility, so that people can know that they're not just being shepherded by one person, but actually they're being shepherded by the elders appointed by God to that congregation. And the plurality of elders also relieves the individual elder from having to weight and the responsibility, because it can be a heavy load. It can be a heavy weight.
That's right.
And the fact that God has designed the church to be governed by a plurality of men is Christ shepherding the under shepherds.
That's right.
Sure.
And reminding them of that.
It's an interesting point too, because this is where the plurality of eldership becomes a blessing for everybody concerned, for the church and also the lead pastor.
Yes.
Because the other thing that needs to be said whenever you think about a shepherding plan for a church is how you're going to shepherd the head shepherd, the lead pastor, who's watching him, who's visiting him and his wife, who's asking tough questions, and who's checking to make sure he's feeding and eating well and things of that sort. Because when we see pastors fall and things of that sort, very often it's because nobody has entree to their life, has access into their life. Nobody's watching their life. And so for our own protection as pastors, we need a shepherding plan that's shared and thought out, that also includes how we're going to be cared for as well. So
great stuff as always, brother. It's good. I like the macro and the micro because it keeps the shepherding personal. It keeps it with the people, and it keeps us away from the CEO type thing or the big thing that we do. That's a kind of away from touching the people's lives, and the plurality of shepherds, right? And that's probably why in a lot of our traditions, when I grew up in particular, the whole role's misunderstood from the very beginning, because there's not really a biblical format in place in terms of plurality. It was one guy, and listen, our congregation again is not that large. It's difficult to shepherd
any number of people.
Any number of people.
Five would be a lot to shepherd. 50, 500.
Think about that for a moment when you don't have a group of men appointed by God.
Amen.
It's been great, brothers.
Good, brothers.
It's been great, but I think the light is coming on. I think it's getting dark on the porch. But it's always good talking to my brothers in ministry and my good friends. Come and see us again on the Front Porch. Thanks for joining us.